I want to begin this morning's message with a question. Have you ever hit a point in your life where you made a choice? And it could be a choice about a relationship, or maybe it's a financial choice. Maybe it's a choice in something you did, or a choice in something you said, where as soon as you make that choice, you wonder, what in the world was I thinking? And why in the world did I ever make that choice? Anybody ever had that experience before? So I was thinking of lots of different stories that I could tell here, but I'll tell you one. Way back in 2003, a couple of buddies and me, we decided that we were going to take a little trip to West Texas to go hiking in Big Bend National Park. Now, on our way to Big Bend National Park, we wanted to stop by a little West Texas town called Marfa. Anybody ever heard of Marfa before? Marfa is famous for pretty much one thing. They are famous for the Marfa Mystery Lights. Now, just in case you haven't heard of the Marfa Mystery Lights before, I brought you a little video that kind of shows you what the Marfa Mystery Lights look like. That's not the video. So it goes. Oh, there it is. There we go. That's looking a little bit better, I think. Still not the video. That's okay. I'll explain it. So, in a field right outside the town of Marfa, right around dusk, on some evenings, there are these little lights that kind of appear in the sky, and they hover over this field. And sometimes the lights move up, and sometimes the lights move down. Sometimes the lights move to the left. Sometimes the lights move to the right. Sometimes the lights conjoin. Sometimes the lights separate. Sometimes the lights change colors. And ostensibly, supposedly, and legendarily, those lights have been there for hundreds of years, but nobody actually knows what the lights are. And so me and my buddies, we decided that we were going to go to Marfa and go to this field to see these lights. And right around dusk, we pull up to the field, and sure enough, these lights begin to appear right over this field and just kind of hover there in the sky. And it was at that point that me and my buddies made a decision. We were going to solve once and for all the mystery of the Marfa lights, and we were going to do it by chasing the lights out in the fields. And so we hop into my buddy's vehicle. Now, my buddy was a sports car guy, so he was driving a Camaro at the time, which is like the perfect off-road vehicle in West Texas, right? And so we all hop into this Camaro, and we start driving out onto the field, and he keeps bottoming out because the field is bumpy and there's shrubs all around us. And when the locals who see what we're doing, they also hop into their vehicles, into their four-wheel drive trucks, and they begin to follow us out onto the field. And on the back of their trucks, they have these gun racks. And in the gun racks are like guns. And they begin to motion to us to come back because they don't like us driving out onto their field. And it was at that point and that choice that we began to ask this question: what in the world were we thinking? And why in the world did we just make that choice? Have you ever made a choice like that? This new series that we're fixing to launch this morning is all about those choices. So, this weekend at Zion, we're kicking off a new series, just 3 weeks, called Chosen. And it's all about the choices that we make, but even more important than that, it's all about the choices that God makes. Because here's something you need to know about God. When it comes to choices, God is much better at making choices than we are. And so for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be taking a look at some of the choices that God makes in the scriptures, and we are going to see what we can learn from his choices for our choices. And this morning, as we kick off our series, we're going to be taking a look at a story from the Old Testament, from 1 Samuel 16, and it's the story of a choice that God makes for a new king over the nation of Israel. Here's the story, 1 Samuel 16, beginning at verse 1. The Lord comes to a guy named Samuel. Now I'm going to pause right there and just set a little bit of context here for you. Samuel is a prophet in the Old Testament nation of Israel. In fact, at this point in Israel's history, he's the primary prophet in the nation of Israel, which means that God speaks to Samuel, and then Samuel speaks to the people of Israel on behalf of God. And so God comes to Samuel, and he says to Samuel, Samuel, how long are you going to mourn for Saul, since I've rejected him as the king over Israel? And so, 1 Samuel 16 opens with a choice that God makes. It's a choice to depose the king of Israel, a king named Saul. Now, if you grew up in church, you may have heard of Saul before. Saul was the first king in the history of the nation of Israel. And in a lot of ways, at least at the beginning, Saul was a good king over the nation of Israel. Saul certainly had the looks to be the king of Israel. One of the things that a lot of people noticed about him was that he was very photogenic. So he looked really good on all those cable news TV shows, right, when he had to give an interview. Not only that, Saul was also exceptionally tall, which meant that everybody in Israel looked up to him. And when you're a king, it's good to have people look up to you. But not only did Saul have the looks, Saul also was a really good leader. In fact, there's this one story right near the beginning of Saul's rule and reign in 1 Samuel 11, where Saul and his nation are being menaced and threatened by a group of people known as the Ammonites. And to situate you here, I'm going to throw a map up on the screen. The Ammonites were just a little bit to the east of the people of Israel. And so Saul wants to restore the national security of Israel to Israel. So he launches a battle against the Ammonites, and he defeats the Ammonites, and he brings back the security of Israel. And so Saul was not only a good-looking guy, he was also a very brave warrior. But things begin to fall apart for Saul in the chapter right before this one, in 1 Samuel 15. Because there's another people group who begins to menace and threaten the nation of Israel. This people group is to the south of the nation of Israel, the Amalekites. And so Saul decides that he's going to go down to the Amalekites and do what he already did to the Ammonites, which is defeat them. But God comes to Saul and he says to Saul, listen, if you want to fight the Amalekites, fine. If you want to defeat the Amalekites, that's fine too. If you want to bring back national security to the nation of Israel, go for it. But here's what I don't want you to do. You can fight and defeat the Amalekites, but you cannot plunder the Amalekites. In other words, don't use this catastrophe as an opportunity to enrich yourself. And so in 1 Samuel 15, Saul goes south and he fights the Amalekites. He defeats the Amalekites. And you know what else he does? He plunders the Amalekites. He steals from the Amalekites. And when God sees what Saul has done, God says, I'm done. And so he goes to this prophet named Samuel in 1 Samuel 16, and he says, all right, when it comes to Saul, he's done. I have chosen a new one to be the next king of Israel. Back to 1 Samuel 16, verse 1, God says to Samuel, here's what I want you to do. I want you to fill your horn with oil, and I want you to be on your way. Because in this day and age, when you would choose a king to be over the nation of Israel, you wouldn't crown the king, you would anoint the king. And so I'm going to send you, God says to Samuel, to a guy named Jesse. He lives in a little town called Bethlehem. And I have chosen one of his sons to be the next king of Israel. Now, when Samuel hears this plan, immediately he becomes concerned about this plan. Because here's the thing, God may have chosen a next king, but Saul is still the current king. And current kings tend to not like next kings. And so if Saul finds out that Samuel is going to choose a new king on behalf of God, Saul is going to be so angry that Samuel might just get the axe literally. And so Samuel says, listen, I can't do this. If Saul hears about this, he will kill me. To which the Lord says, don't worry, I have a plan. Just take a heifer with you. Take a young cow and say, I have come to sacrifice today to the Lord. After all, you're a religious guy, and sacrifices are religious things. And so if a religious guy offers a religious sacrifice, no one's going to think anything of that. But when you get there, make sure you invite Jesse and his family to the sacrifice. And I'll take care of the rest. From there, God says to Samuel, I'll show you what to do. And so that's what Samuel does. He makes the journey to the little town of Bethlehem. He finds Jesse. He finds his family. And as soon as Jesse and his family arrives, this is verse 6, Samuel sees one of Jesse's sons. His name is Eliab. And as soon as he sees him, he thinks this guy is the one. He says, surely the Lord's anointed, the one the Lord wants me to anoint as the next king of Israel, surely this guy is standing right here before me. And Samuel had some good reasons to think that Eliab might be the one. Because kind of like Saul, Eliab looked the part. He was very handsome. Kind of like Saul, Eliab was also tall, which meant that everybody in Israel would be looking up to him. But that's when the Lord steps in. And he says to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things that people look at. And then this line, people, they look at the outward appearance, but the Lord, he looks at the heart. Now, this line right here. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. This is probably the most famous line in the whole book of 1 Samuel 16. In fact, just by a show of hands, how many of you have heard this line before? Because this line is so famous. I want to take just a moment to try to unpack this line with you. And I'm going to warn you right now, I'm going to geek out majorly here for just a second, if you don't mind. And so if you could just bear with me for the next couple of minutes, because the next couple of minutes are kind of important, but they're going to take some unpacking. And so the Old Testament written in Hebrew, and I actually want to show you what the Hebrew looks like behind this line. Anybody want to try to read that out loud for me? Anybody want to take their best shot at it? Here's what I want to do, okay? If you'll just bear with me, I want to walk through this Hebrew with you because it's actually really important to understanding this story. And so I'm going to give you a quick little primer on Hebrew, just one thing you need to know about Hebrew, okay? English, you read from left to right. Hebrew, you read from right to left. And so, all those funny looking squiggles there up on the screen, we're going to start on the right side and not on the left side. And so, that word on the far right in yellow, that is the word for that is the word ha-adam, and it means people. In fact, the first man in the history of the world was named what? Adam. And it's actually from the Hebrew word ha-adam. It's a word that means people. Then, the word that is right next to that word, ha-adam, is the word yareh, which means to see or to look. And so ha-adam yareh means that people, they look. And then, you see that funny little squiggly thing in yellow there? In Hebrew, that's a lamed. And a lamed can be used a lot of times as a preposition in Hebrew. And so traditionally, this is translated as the preposition at in this verse. But more commonly, like all over the Hebrew Old Testament, it's not translated as the preposition at, it's translated as the preposition to. And that's actually the translation that I like. It's not that people are looking at something, it's that they're looking to something. And here's what people are looking to. Okay? Right next to that lamed, that funny yellow squiggly looking thing, is the word anayim, which is the word for eyes. And so here's what God is saying to Samuel. When people make decisions, here's what they look to. They look to their eyes. When people make choices, here's what they look to. They look to what they can see. Is the guy short or is he tall? Is he skinny or is he not? Is he good looking or should he be wearing a paper bag? This is what they look to. They look to what they can see, but God doesn't make decisions that way. And so, if you'll follow me through the rest of the Hebrew, the next little part in yellow, that is the word Yahweh in Hebrew, which is the name of God, and so that gets translated as the Lord. The Lord, okay, when he sees something, when he looks at something, and again, there's a lamed right there, and so it's not just what he's looking at, but what he's looking to, he looks to the hearts. And so here's the way that I would translate this line. People, they look to the eyes, but the Lord, he looks to the heart. Now, here's the reason I just tortured you with that, okay? I actually have a point in torturing you with this. A lot of times, if you follow the traditional translation of this verse, people look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. A lot of times, the way this gets interpreted is like this. Most people, they look at things that are external. They do look at how good you look or how charismatic you are or how much money you make. But God, when he looks at things, he looks at the internal. He looks at your heart. And so, if God is going to choose and use you, you need to have a righteous heart, a holy heart, a good heart, a noble heart, a God-pleasing heart, a selfless heart, a humble heart, a loving heart, a patient heart. Anybody have that kind of a heart? That's a problem. Because here's what that means. If God is looking at your heart, and if that's what God is looking for, God's going to have a problem choosing and using you. Which is why I like this other translation better. Because people, when they make choices, they look to the eyes. Whose eyes do they look to? Their own eyes. What they can see. But when God makes choices, what does he look to? He looks to the heart. Whose heart is he looking to? Not your heart, but his heart. You see, the reason Eliab isn't chosen to be the next king of Israel, that has nothing to do with something that is wrong with Eliab. Because it has nothing to do with Eliab's heart. It has everything to do with God's heart and God's plan. And what God is fixing to do in this story is he is fixing to reveal a choice. A choice that he is going to make for the people of Israel. And so the search for a new king continues. 1 Samuel 16, verse 8, Jesse then calls another one of his sons, Abinadab, and he has him pass in front of Samuel. And Samuel sees him and he says, you know what? This ain't the one either. Then Jesse had another one of his sons pass by, Shammah, but Samuel says, the Lord has not chosen this one. In fact, Jesse has 7 sons, and one by one, each of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel says to Jesse, son after son after son after son, God has not chosen this one, or this one, or this one. Samuel can't seem to get the God nod for the next king of Israel. And you have to be thinking that this has to be frustrating for Samuel. Because after all, he's risking life and limb to try to find the next king of the nation of Israel. Because if Saul finds out what he's doing, he's dead. And so you can almost hear the frustration in Samuel's voice when he goes back to Jesse and he says, okay, so we've been through 7 sons. Are these all the sons that you have? And you can almost see Jesse's face turn red as he responds sheepishly, well, there is still the youngest, but trust me, he's not monarch material, okay? He's a farmhand, and he's out tending the sheep. To which Samuel says, nah, that's not the way this works. You send for him. We're not even sitting down. You and me, we're going to stand until he arrives. And so Jesse sends for him, and he has him brought in. And just like all of Jesse's sons, he too was glowing with health. He had a fine appearance and handsome features. Apparently, all of Jesse's sons should have been in like a boy band because they were all good looking, okay? And that's when God says, rise and anoint him. He is the one. And so Samuel took his horn of oil, and he anointed who? David. David. Now, if you know something about Bible history, you know that David is not just any old king of Israel. David is the greatest king in the history of the nation of Israel. He was the one that God had chosen. But why? Why did God choose this son? over all the other sons. I think it goes back to that really famous line in 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. You know, when it comes to people and how they make their choices, they look to the eyes. But when it comes to the Lord and how he makes his choices, he looks to his heart. In a lot of ways, I think this verse right here gives us a paradigm or a framework for making choices. Because when it comes right down to it, there are only two ways that you can make a choice. One way is this. You can make a choice with your eyes. And by the way, we do this all the time. You ever let your eyes linger a little too long on somebody of the opposite sex? And maybe you even think a few things you know you shouldn't be thinking? What have you done right there? You made a choice with your eyes. You ever scroll through Amazon and the algorithm shows you all sorts of stuff that you didn't even know existed, but all of a sudden you now think you need it? And so you order more than what you can pay for. What have you done? You've made a choice with your eyes. Here's the problem with making choices using your eyes. Choices that you make with your eyes are almost always choices where after you make them, you go, what was I thinking? Why in the world did I make that choice that way? Which is why 1 Samuel 16, verse 7 invites us into a different way to make choices. We are called to make choices not with our eyes, but with God's heart. Here's what that means. So once God chooses David to be the king of Israel, David becomes a whole dynasty. David becomes one king of Israel, but then after him, his son becomes the next king of Israel. And then after him, his grandson becomes the next king of Israel. Then after him, his great-grandson becomes the next king of Israel. And on and on and on, the Davidic dynasty goes, and it all starts with this family tree of Jesse. The problem is, a lot of these kings, even in David's dynasty, didn't make choices using God's heart. They made choices using their own eyes. And those choices got the people and the nation of Israel into big trouble, financially, militarily, and even spiritually. And people began to get frustrated with David's dynasty. In fact, more than that, they began to mock David's dynasty. They actually would say, hey, listen, when it comes to David and his dynasty, when it comes to the family tree of Jesse, Jesse doesn't really have a family tree. Jesse has a family stump. I mean, that tree has been cut down because that family is making Israel like a rump, a laughing stock among all the other nations. And about 300 years after David is first anointed as the new king of Israel, there's this new prophet. His name is Isaiah. And he picks up on that taunt. He picks up on that criticism of David and Jesse and their family tree. And he says in Isaiah 11, verse 1, even though Jesse's family tree looks like a stump, I actually see a sign of life coming out of that stump. One day, I see a new king coming out of that family tree. He's going to be like a shoot who's coming up from the stump of Jesse. And he's going to be a great king. He's going to be a good king. And here's why. He will not choose by what he sees with his eyes. Because those choices are never any good. Instead, he will choose by what God has in his heart. And here's what God has in his heart. He has righteousness with which this king will judge the needy. And he has justice, with which this king will give decisions for the poor. And you know what? One day, this king comes. And he makes choices in exactly the way that Isaiah said he was going to make choices. To people who are needy and to people who are poor. Because they have been robbed by things like Satan and sin. This king decides that he is going to choose them. But not just to be his subjects, but to be his children. That's the way that this king chooses. In fact, Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4. Even before God made the world, here's what's in God's heart. You, me, us. God has a heart for us. He loves us, and that's why he chooses us in his king, whose name is Jesus Christ. You know, next weekend when we do this chosen thing, when we sponsor kids from Tanzania, one of the things that I like about this choice is that this is a choice you can't make with your eyes. You know why? Because they're halfway across the world. You can't see these kids. But it is a choice that you can make with God's heart. In fact, just one more thing before we wrap up. Quick story, okay? So me and my son Hayden, one of the things that I've been teaching him to do is yard work, because that's what every good father teaches his son to do, because the father, eventually wants to get out of the yard work business. And so I've been teaching my son how to mow the lawn. I've been teaching my son how to weed whack. My son really loves the grass blower, where you blow all the stuff right off the sidewalk. But the thing that Hayden likes the most is after we are done, I drop down the tailgate on the back of my truck, and we sit on the back of the tailgate, and we have a Coke, okay? There's a picture of Hayden with his Coke. Now, I want you to notice something about that Coke, okay? That Coke is a real Coke, okay? It's not a can of Coke, It's not one of those nasty plastic bottles of Coke where you get all the chemical taste in there, That is a glass bottle of Coke made not with corn syrup, but with the pure cane sugar. This is the good stuff. And so we sit on the back of my truck and we have a Coke. Now, I taught Hayden how to do something after you finish the Coke, because this bottle can become a beautiful instrument. Did you know that? All you got to do when it's empty is go. He does better than I do on it, okay? And so as soon as he learned that, man, he grabbed his glass bottle of Coke and he started making music all over the house. And it was fine and it was fun for a day. But after that, I decided, maybe it was time to throw it away. And so I talked to Hayden and I said, give me the glass bottle. And he said, no. He wanted to keep the glass bottle of Coke so he could make music. And I said, okay, you can keep it for a while, but eventually I'm going to get it and I'm going to throw it away. And so one day I come home in the middle of the day and I see my opportunity. Because there sitting on the kitchen counter is the glass bottle of Coke. And I walk into the kitchen and I notice that there are these Post-it notes all over it, and I get closer. And all of a sudden I see these little messages from Hayden to me. I love you, Dad. You are the best dad ever, the notes say. After that, do you think I threw that Coke bottle away? I actually talked to Hayden about this. He wrote those notes for two reasons. Number one, he loves me. Number two, he didn't want me to throw his Coke bottle away. And his strategy worked. Hayden loves me, and I'm glad he does. He has a heart for me, and I'm glad he has one. And here's the funny thing about Hayden's heart. Hayden's heart made a difference in my choice. Guys, we're faced with choices all the time. Am I going to choose anger, or am I going to choose patience? Am I going to choose hatred, or am I going to choose love? Am I going to choose bitterness, or am I going to choose forgiveness? Am I going to choose a lie, or am I going to choose the truth? God's heart can affect your choice. Because just like Isaiah 11 says, when God saw you as needy and poor, robbed by Satan and sin, God made a choice where he chose you to be one of his children. It was the best choice God ever made. You are what it means to be chosen. So now you go forth and choose wisely.